Councillor O'Brien, 30 seconds to introduce.
Okay, it's to ask the Minister how many guidance notes or oversight documents have been published in relation to dealing with abnormally low contract tenders by either himself or his predecessor since 2011.
Minister, 2 minutes.
The awarding of public contracts is governed by the fundamental principles derived by the Treaty on the functioning of the European Union as they apply to public procurement. And these include transparency, equal treatment and non-discrimination, proportionality and mutual recognition. The European Union Directive set out legal framework for the award of contracts that exceed the specified monetary thresholds for services, supplies and works. Under Article 69 of 2014/24/EU, the EU Directive governing public procurement, contracting authorities are obliged to require tenderers to explain the price or costs in a tender where tenders appear to be abnormally low in relation to the works, supplies or services. Contracting authorities must assess the response from the tenderer before coming to a decision as to whether they will admit the tender or reject it on the basis that it is abnormally low. Where the explanation provided tenderer does not satisfactorily account for the low level of price or costs, having taken into account the circumstances outlined in the procurement directives, the contracting authority may reject the tender, but they are not obliged to do so. When investigating what may appear to be an abnormally low tender, contracting authorities must take into consideration that the possibility that the tenderer may be obtaining more favourable terms from suppliers and subcontractors separate to their rivals. There is little scope for manoeuvre on labour rates, since contractors are required by the law to pay workers covered by the sectoral employment orders in accordance with the terms of the applicable SEO. However, more efficient methods of working due to reduced labour costs cannot be ruled out in assessing a tender. Notwithstanding this, there is nothing to prevent an entity from performing a contract at loss, subject to them being compliant with labour, social and environmental regulations. Where the contracting authority discovers that the price is abnormally low because the tenderer is not meeting their obligations in the field of social, labour and environmental law, then the tender must be rejected. Where work contracts are concerned, specific reference to unbalanced tenders, abnormally low tenders, is made in Section 8 of the Standard Template Instructions to Tenders published under the Capital Works Management Framework. These documents, which constitute the rules under which a tender completion is run, must be used in all public works contracts and have been published since 2008.
Deputy O'Brien.
Minister, and in fairness, I know the law. It's contained in the statutory instrument 284/2016, which deals with abnormally low contracts. That's not the question I asked. I asked, was there any guidance notes given by your department since 2011 in relation to this? But while we're on the issue of abnormally low contracts and how they're meant to be dealt with by the contracting authority, why is it that the contract which came in relation to the National Paediatric Children's Hospital, why was that not dealt with as an abnormally low contract, and why was there no discussions, as far as I'm aware anyway, maybe you have contradicted information, why was there no discussions entered into in relation to that particularly low contract?
Minister has 1 minute.
Start with the ending one. Just in relation to the National Paediatric Children's Hospital, the Deputy will be aware in responses that have already been given by Minister Donoghue that the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board sought in advance of the contract being awarded to move away or apply for a derogation from the use of the standard works contracts, and this was established by the GCCC, and they engaged in their work in May of 2014, and they undertook it over a long period of time. But derogations are allowed in exceptional circumstances where there can be a presentation to the GCCC, who is a separate entity, that the circumstances of the standard work contract would not suit the development of the particular piece of infrastructure, in this case the National Paediatric Children's Hospital. Just in relation to guidance that's available, the Deputy has outlined that he is aware of the regulations as set out in the statutory instrument and as well as that the law itself. there are provisions of guidance and there are supports available to contracting or contractors in advance of a tender being submitted through the contracting authorities, who will clarify individual pieces of tender in advance of the tendering being submitted, and as well as that through their representative organisations. As you know, the small and medium-sized enterprise committee within the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, which I chair, has representative organisations from across the sectors, and I'm sure they will be able to engage with their own sectors in that.
Deputy O'Brien's final question.
The question was to move away from the standard contracting practice to a two-phase practice. It wasn't to deal with the abnormally low contract price that came in. So again, I'd ask the question, why was the guidance which is there, and actually the law which is there in relation to the statutory instrument, why was that not adhered to and implemented in relation to this particular project, when you had a contracting price which was abnormally low compared to the other prices which were tendered for? I think that's a question that needs to be asked, given the individuals who sat on the development board and who were responsible for that particular contract, and one of those individuals actually put on the development board because of his expertise and knowledge in this area.
In response, Minister.
Let's concur. I think Minister Donoghue has addressed that issue both in committee and here in the House previously, but just in relation to, in general, you know, where there is issues of abnormally low, the contracting authority in any case, whether it is a public body or a state agency, has the capability that it doesn't have to accept a tender, and I've outlined the reasons for that. But as well as that, within every tender, once it's awarded and a contract is awarded, there is also a dispute resolution mechanism, and there can be, for instance, issues that run into the tender after it has been awarded, where there needs to be dispute resolution, where issues arise that wouldn't have been foreseen. But in relation to the specific issue that you raised, I'm sure that the PwC report that has been charged with looking at all of this will be able to enlighten all of us and the debate in its entirety around this, because, you know, I can't comment on an individual case like this, because it is ultimately up to, regardless of the contract, it is ultimately up to the contracting authority. In this case, Deputy, it's the National Paediatric Hospital Board and their parent department, the Department of Health, who would have ultimate responsibility for it.
Question for